Among those who claim to be traditional or conservative Catholics, there is a lot of misinformation about what constitutes the teaching of the Catholic Church. This is true on the matter of the authority of the Holy Office and Roman congregations. Many people have misconceptions on this issue. For instance, one false traditionalist expressed a common error when he stated,
because the statements issued by congregations of the Church with the approval of a true Pope are to be accepted with the authority of the magisterium itself.
That's wrong, as we will show in this video. Knowing the truth about this issue is relevant to recognizing the true teaching of the Catholic Church on salvation and rejecting modernist heresies. The Holy Office is a Roman congregation whose official establishment is frequently dated to 1542 under Pope Paul III, but its history as the Roman Inquisition goes back to the time of Innocent III. The Holy Office was set up as the Supreme Court located at Rome for trials concerning the faith. Established in 1542 by Pope Paul III under the name of the Sacred Congregation of the Roman and Universal Inquisition or Holy Office, it originally consisted of 6 cardinals. It was reorganized and expanded by subsequent popes. In addition to the Holy Office, other Roman congregations were established to carry out the governance of the Pope. Under the arrangement established by Pope Pius X, there were actually 11 Roman congregations, although some would put the number at 13. The Holy Office was one Roman congregation. Other Roman congregations were the Congregation of the Sacraments, the Congregation of the Index, etc. Statements issued by the Holy Office or another Roman congregation can be approved by a pope either in common form or in specific form. When an act of a Roman congregation, such as the Holy Office, is approved by a pope in common form, it does not take from the act of the congregation its nature and quality as the act of an inferior. Such an act of the Roman congregation is not infallible, even when approved by a pope in common form. As pre-Vatican II theologian Ludwig Ott stated, quote, "The decisions of the Roman congregations, Holy Office, Bible Commission, are not infallible," end quote. As Patrick Toner, writing in the Catholic Encyclopedia in 1910, also stated, quote, "It should be observed in conclusion that papal infallibility is a personal and incommunicable charisma, which is not shared by any pontifical tribunal. It was promised directly to Peter and to each of Peter's successors in the primacy, but not as a prerogative the exercise of which could be delegated to others. Hence, doctrinal decisions or instructions issued by the Roman congregations, even when approved by the Pope in the ordinary way, have no claim to be considered infallible. To be infallible, they must be issued by the Pope himself in his own name according to the conditions already mentioned as requisite for ex cathedra teaching," end quote. But what about a statement of a Roman congregation such as the Holy Office that is approved by a pope in specific form? Some would say that even then the act does not necessarily become infallible, but does so only when the Pope, in approving it in specific form, makes it a solemn proclamation binding the whole Church. For instance, Father Benedetto Oggetti, writing in the Catholic Encyclopedia in 1912, states, quote, "Even when specifically approved by the Pope, decrees of the Holy Office are not infallible," end quote. So, statements of Roman congregations when approved by a Pope in the ordinary way are not infallible. Amleto Ciccognani was a professor of canon law at the Pontifical Institute of Canon Law in Rome. He also stated in a work given in Imprimatur in 1934, quote, "Pontifical approbation or confirmation, in the acts of the sacred congregations it is usually expressed in these words, the Holy Father has approved or confirmed and ratified, is ordinarily given in common form and not in specific form. Specific approbation makes an act pontifical, namely it becomes an act of the Roman pontiff. Common approbation, on the contrary, does not change the act, and hence it derives its essential force from the dicastery, receiving only added force from the Roman pontiff. Consequently, even when given with previous consultation of the pontiff, the acts of the sacred congregations are not infallible, nor are they vested with that absolutely supreme authority which belongs exclusively to the Roman pontiff," end quote. We could cite others to the same effect. Note how different these statements are from the nonsense we heard from the false traditionalist.
Because the statements issued by congregations of the Church with the approval of a true Pope are to be accepted with the authority of the magisterium itself.
Before we proceed, we should refute a certain objection that some raise on this issue. Some refer to the proposition condemned by Pope Pius IX, which states, quote, "The obligation by which Catholic teachers and authors are strictly bound is confined to those things only which are proposed to universal belief as dogmas of faith by the infallible judgment of the Church," end quote. People misapply this quote. They pretend like it condemns the position that a Roman congregation could make a mistake, or that it means that something a Roman congregation decrees can never be rejected. but that's false. That's not what it is condemning. Rather, it condemns the position that Catholic teachers and authors are only bound to things pronounced by the Church as dogmas. That's an error because besides things formally proposed as dogmas, Catholic teachers and authors are bound to the canonization of saints, dogmatic facts and conclusions flowing from dogmas, the universal and constant teaching of Catholic theologians, since that reflects the teaching of the ordinary and universal magisterium to which one is also bound, disciplinary laws promulgated as binding upon all the members of the Church, the unanimous consent of Church Fathers on a particular point of Scripture, etc. Thus, the obligation of obedience is not confined or limited to solemn dogmatic definitions. Further, although statements of Roman congregations approved in common form by a pope are not infallible, that doesn't mean that Catholics are just permitted to dismiss them off the bat. Hence, Pope Pius X, in his November 18, 1907 motu proprio, emphasized that there's a duty to submit in conscience to the decisions of the Pontifical Biblical Commission. People are bound to submit to the decisions of a Roman congregation approved by a pope, unless something of greater weight or a valid reason calls for a rejection of it. But a decree of a Roman congregation pertaining to the faith that has solemnly been approved by a pope, and thus made absolutely binding on the whole Church, must not be rejected for any reason. Here is pre-Vatican II theologian Father Joseph Pohl, writing with an imprimatur in 1911, explaining how respect and obedience is given to a decree of the Holy Office approved in common form unless it's clear or highly probable that the congregation has made a mistake. Quote, "Those who took this view forgot that a decree of the Holy Office, even when approved by the Pope in common form, does not partake of the nature of an infallible decision. The religious assent with which Catholics are bound to receive the decisions of the Holy Office is a duty growing out of Catholic respect for authority and imposed by obedience. But it would be wrong to interpret it as forbidding deeper research into the soundness or unsoundness of a decision which does not per se claim to be infallible. The respect and obedience we owe to the Church will prompt us not to refuse our assent until it is positively certain, or at least highly probable, that the sacred congregation has made a mistake. The Pope in his capacity as supreme teacher cannot delegate his infallibility to any man or body of men. Hence, his approval of a congregational decree does not invest that decree with infallibility, unless indeed the sovereign pontiff sees fit by an approbation in solemn form to raise it to the rank of an ex cathedra decision solemnly binding all the faithful." End quote. One of the clearest examples of how the Holy Office and Roman congregations are not in themselves infallible is the Geocentrism case. In the 17th century, St. Robert Bellarmine, a doctor of the Church, many theologians of the Holy Office, and various popes considered the denial of geocentrism to be heresy. This was reflected in acts of the Holy Office and Roman congregations approved in common form. Then in the 18th and 19th centuries, the position was reversed. With the approval of popes, Roman congregations suspended the condemnation of heliocentric works and allowed their publication. In 1822, the Holy Office, with Pope Pius VII's approval, threatened condemnations against those who would not allow the publication of heliocentric works. This is from the Holy Office in 1822. Quote, "There must be no denial by the present or by future masters of the Sacred Apostolic Palace of permission to print and to publish works which treat of the mobility of the earth and of the immobility of the sun, according to the common opinion of modern astronomers. Those who would show themselves to be reluctant or would disobey should be forced under punishments at the choice of this sacred congregation." End quote. So here we have the Holy Office in 1822 threatening penalties against those who don't give permission to publish works which teach that the sun is immobile. But the position of the Roman congregations in the 17th century was the opposite. In 1616, 11 theologians of the Holy Office, with the common form approval of Pope Paul V, condemned as heretical the position that the sun is immobile. The same Holy Office, with the common form approval of Pope Paul V, condemned that the earth is not the center of the universe. Likewise, in 1633, the Holy Office under Pope Urban VIII condemned as heretical the position that the sun is the center of the universe and does not move from east to west, and that the earth moves and is not the center of the universe. This condemnation of the denial of geocentrism was approved by Pope Urban VIII, although not in an ex cathedra form. It was also circulated widely. Quote, "Pope Urban VIII had no intention of concealing Galileo's abjuration and sentence. Instead, he ordered copies of both to be sent to all inquisitors and papal nuncios, that they might notify all their clergy, and especially all the professors of mathematics and philosophy within their districts, particularly those at Florence, Padua, and Pisa. This was done during the summer and fall of 1633." End quote. Then in 1921, Pope Benedict XV, contradicting the 17th century position of the Holy Office, stated that the earth on which we live may not be the center of the universe, as at one time was thought. Pope Benedict XV promoted as possibly true the very position that the Holy Office a few centuries earlier condemned with the common form approval of popes. This video is not about whether geocentrism is true. We are rather pointing out that Roman congregations and popes in their fallible capacity took two contrary positions on the theological status of geocentrism. Thus, the Holy Office is not infallible in itself. This is important to know because modernism and heresy, especially on salvation, started to percolate in the teaching of theologians and members of the Roman congregations before Vatican II. That's one reason that Vatican II happened. We also find the trend toward modernism in the instruction of the Holy Office on the ecumenical movement issued on December 20th, 1949. That instruction declared it permissible for Catholics and non-Catholics to pray the Our Father together at meetings and conferences. That's another example of how the Holy Office is not the same thing as the magisterium. The official teaching of the magisterium is free from all error. Acts of the Holy Office and Roman congregations are not. We bring these facts out because many so-called traditionalists have constructed a pseudo-magisterium that consists of selective statements from fallible theologians and other non-magisterial sources. They attempt to assign to these things an authority or a protection or an infallibility that they don't possess. In the process, they deceive and corrupt the faith of various people. These points are extremely relevant to the case of Father Leonard Feeney, for many people falsely claim that the Church condemned Father Feeney's teaching in 1949. They are so wrong. They are referring to the alleged Holy Office letter dated August 8, 1949 called Suprema Haec Sacra. But what they don't tell you or don't emphasize is that this alleged Holy Office letter, which is filled with modernism and error, was approved in common form by Pius XII, not in specific or solemn form. It was also not signed by Pius XII. As a common form Holy Office letter, it's not infallible, and it can be rejected if it contradicts something of greater weight, which it definitely does. This video is not about why Pius XII, who allowed modernism to grow in various ways, approved the letter in common form. It's about the Holy Office and Roman congregations. Even someone like Monsignor Joseph Clifford Fenton admitted that Suprema Haec Sacra was not infallible. Furthermore, the alleged Holy Office letter, Suprema Haec Sacra, dated August 8, 1949, wasn't even promulgated in the normal fashion. It was never published in the Acts of the Apostolic See. Thus, it's true to say that it was never officially published. Instead of the Acts of the Apostolic See, it was published in the Pilot, the news organ for the Archdiocese of Boston. Indeed, when it was initially published in the Pilot in 1949, it wasn't even published in full. It was only published in full in the Pilot 3 years later in 1952. It's really a piece of trash modernist document. In reality, it's a pseudo-Holy Office letter. It also became the foundation for the modernist rejection of the dogma outside the Church, there is no salvation. The entire purpose of the letter was to give cover to the modernists who wanted to silence and condemn Father Feeney for preaching that non-Catholics must be converted to the Catholic faith to be saved. That's why at about the same time it was published in Boston, a New England paper ran a typical headline that stated, "Vatican holds no salvation outside Church doctrine to be false." That was the effect of the modernist pseudo-Holy Office letter Suprema Haec Sacra. It was written in response to the modernist heretic, quote, Cardinal Richard Cushing, a man who called the dogma outside the Church there is no salvation nonsense, and became a B'nai B'rith Man of the Year. Father Feeney was having a lot of success converting people by preaching the absolute necessity of the Catholic faith for salvation, just as true Catholics in our day who hold the same position have success in converting people that far exceeds other groups. The heretic Richard Cushing silenced Feeney and put his group under interdict because they were preaching Catholic dogma and converting people. Cushing was upset that Father Feeney was boldly telling non-Catholics that they won't be saved unless they convert to the Catholic faith, so he complained to Rome. What Cushing received in response was the modernist letter he was looking for. Sadly, most of the priests in the years just before Vatican II had fallen into heresy on salvation. Vatican II didn't happen overnight. Decades of errors and even heresies, infallible sources especially on salvation, led to it. The modernist document Suprema Haec Sacra was the pre-Vatican II culmination of that process. This video is not about the errors in Suprema Haec Sacra, it is about the Holy Office and Roman congregations. We have covered the facts on this. So, when people run around and act like the irregular common form supposed Holy Office letter Suprema Haec Sacra is a definitive act of the magisterium, they are just deceiving people. They don't understand the proper role or authority of the Holy Office or the distinction between it and the magisterium and the chair of St. Peter. Suprema Haec Sacra was a fallible letter written by a modernist, and it must be rejected because it contradicts the teaching of the chair of St. Peter. In response to these facts about the fallibility of Roman congregations, some argue that although the Holy Office decrees are not infallible, they are absolutely guaranteed in every case to be safe. Their claim is false and they have no magisterial support for it. It's true that the Holy Office sometimes would declare a doctrine safe or unsafe, but if that act is fallible in itself, there is no ultimate safety in what can be erroneous. It's true that laws of the Catholic Church, which have been promulgated as binding upon all by the supreme authority of the Church, are necessarily safe, but this does not apply to fallible Holy Office acts. Indeed, if something can be mistaken unsound and erroneous, then it can contain error that is opposed to the faith. There is no absolute and guaranteed safety in embracing error. On this matter, we recently had a brief exchange with a sedevacantist priest who was ordained by Donald Sanborn. The priest's name is Damien. We asked him if he agrees with Donald Sanborn that souls can be saved in false religions. He refused to answer the question.
And if someone is saved who is in those false religions, it has nothing to do with that false religion. It has to do with the grace of God and their ignorance.
The idea that souls can be saved in false religions is of course a heresy that contradicts defined Catholic dogma. He wouldn't answer the question because he's sadly a heretic who holds the same position as Sanborn and similar priests. In our exchange, Damien admitted that decrees of the Holy Office are not infallible. Not infallible, yes, he wrote in 2019. He then argued on the same day that there's no way you can go wrong following them. So according to him, a Holy Office decree is not infallible, which means that it can contain error, but there's no way you can be wrong following it. Of course, that is self-refuting nonsense. Such contradictory claims emanate from people who attempt to defend a false position and labor under a false understanding of church teaching. What they are confusing is safety with a diminution of culpability. Someone who follows the error contained in a fallible act of a Roman congregation or some other approved work, sincerely believing that its Catholic teaching isn't absolutely safe, but he or she could very well have diminished or eliminated culpability until it's clear to that person, from some fact or a teaching of greater weight, that what he or she thought was the correct position is not. Those are the true principles about the Holy Office and Roman congregations.